Okay.
Hi, and welcome to the U World Order Showcase podcast. Today we have with us Barbara J. Hunt. Barbara is an author, and she is here to share with us the power of forgiveness. Welcome to the show, Barbara. It's really nice to have you here.
Thanks very much, Jill. Lovely to be here.
So tell us your story.
Um, well, I'm a forgiveness nerd or specialist, as is probably more pertinent to say. And I am a coach and a speaker, and I offer workshops, and I'm a forgiveness author. And I am passionate about all things personal and spiritual development. I'm also a musician. But I don't make my money being a musician, but I sing about the same kinds of things as I teach in my workshops and in what I offer. And I got very interested in the subject of forgiveness, and it's quite contentious. And I like the fact that it's quite
Cool.
contentious.
So, how do you define forgiveness? Because I think it's a little different.
Well, one of the things I'm really interested in is why we find it so hard. And I think because culturally, especially us in the West, we have much more secular approaches to life, that some of what maybe we would have learnt about spiritually is excluded from our lives. And I think this is a great detriment. And I do teach about forgiveness as a secular ethics practice. But if you're on a personal and spiritual development path, then it really is a master spiritual practice. And from my point of view, it has enormous potential, not just for our own inner well being and healing the past, but also in our current lives and healing our current relationships and potentially for the future. There's a lovely quote by the Archbishop Desmond Tutu, who died a few years ago. And he said, "Without forgiveness, there really is no future." And to me, when I look at the global situation, I just see division, 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 resentment, hatred, grievance, bitching, hate speech. It's like all of the things that as I would count them under the umbrella of resentment, alive and well, and we don't seem to have any strategies to cope with it. And because forgiveness is so misunderstood, and there's people writing about toxic forgiveness or unforgiveness, or like all these different terms that are in the zeitgeist, which I think are just really unhelpful. And even some of the most inspiring stories of forgiveness that are gathered are still talked about in a way that makes forgiveness seem either irrelevant because it's only necessary if you've had trauma, or the examples of it are so extraordinary that I think most people would just think, how could you ever forgive that? How are we ever going to forgive the atrocities that are going on, or this person who's been killed, or this child who's been murdered, or like we think forgiveness is in that realm, but we don't think about our everyday forgiveness. And when I work one-to-one with clients, I always I used to work on a retreat, and we used to say, if it's not one thing, it's your mother. And always, as far as I'm concerned, we need to do forgiveness work on our family of origin, because although our parents were probably doing the best they could, for sure none of us had perfect parents, and apparently I wasn't a perfect parent either. Shock horror. So it's great to know that there's something that can be done to repair those relationships, even though they're past. So I can go on and on and on, but I'd love to hear back from you.
I I love the top misuse it. They misunderstand what it's all about. They want it to be about, they confuse it with the word excuse to excuse someone's behavior is different than to forgive someone's behavior. Excusing someone for what they've done is an outward gesture. It affects your relationship with them, and you can determine if you want to excuse that behavior and you're going to let it continue, or if you want to forgive them, which is an inward expression of how you're going to deal with a situation. You reframe it for yourself so it no longer affects you, and you can become indifferent to the situation rather than have an emotional reaction to the situation. When somebody says, forgive me, what they really mean is excuse me. They don't understand the difference.
That's a really good point. It's a really good point. And often we think that forgiveness is letting somebody off the hook or saying that something is okay, and that it means that we're relinquishing our boundaries. And forgiveness is exactly as you say, it's an inside attitude towards that other person. Am I going to hold ill will against them for what they did or didn't do? And I describe it a bit like this, where you're gathering up all the little grievances and the things that somebody's done wrong, and we kind of like, we have our logbook as well, and we kind of hold all of these things against other people. And the definition of forgiveness that I use, that I learned many years ago, is forgiveness is the absolute refusal to hold ill will against someone for what they did or didn't do. And so you're consciously choosing to relinquish your ill will, which is your judgment, your resentment, your hatred, your grievances against the other person. And it doesn't mean that they're not accountable for what they've done. It doesn't mean that you might want also for them to make amends. But often what happens with forgiveness is we hope people will make amends, and we wait with our grievances until they do, and then we'll forgive them. And the trouble with that is somebody might die before they've ever apologized or they've made amends. And sometimes people don't have the same perspective about what they've done. And so you could be holding your ill will forever and never be able to let it go. And that's why choosing to forgive, being able to forgive, is an act of empowerment. So you're the one choosing what goes on in your heart. And this is really important because we like to think that we have autonomy and agency as individuals. And the truth is that we're interconnected with each other all the time. But I am 100% in charge of my behavior. I'm in charge of what I think about other people, how I choose to treat them, and what I carry in my heart. If I want to carry a whole log of grievances that I've kept through all the years, or I can choose to work through it and free myself so I can meet each moment with a free heart. And it's a subtle practice, but it's also, I think, a mental and emotional health practice. Being able to let go of that old material, because we sometimes, we wake up feeling like, oh, I'm really depressed, or like, this is going wrong in my life, and we don't realize that there's a whole backlog of old material that we just haven't faced or worked through. And forgiveness is, it's so misunderstood. We think it means things that it doesn't. We think that there's, the idea of actually it being toxic to let go of your ill will is ridiculous. What could be toxic is staying in a relationship that's not healthy or abusive, but that's not forgiveness. Forgiveness is about not holding ill will against somebody. It's about not bearing the grudge. It's about choosing, and ultimately to be unconditionally loving, which is probably a bit further along. Most of us just need a bit of help to just choose to just stop hating the people or resenting them or even being jealous. I was thinking about this today, that sometimes what I would call resentment, I have a lovely big broad umbrella. Pretty much any time you want something to be different from the way it is. I resent the weather in England. It's awful at the moment, so, but what's the point in resenting it? I'm wanting it to be different. Pointless, because it is the way it is. And the same with relationships. If I feel jealous of a friend who's spending more time with an old friend, it's kind of like, that's all to do with my internal world and my understanding, my meaning making, which is why it's partly a mental health practice, because we have to understand that we're making up those stories. And at the same time, it's the work of the heart, because we don't really do anything about our hearts. Even the fact that we talk about mental health and we don't say emotional well-being, which is, the two are
Heart
different.
health.
Yeah, but it is heart health and it is relational health. And we're not taught anything about how to have healthy relationships. We're not taught how to communicate with each other. We're not taught how to let go of grievances. Maybe when you're a kid, your parents say, forgive your sister. And you're going, we don't really have good teaching about our emotional well-being. And so my mission really is to talk about forgiveness in a way that makes it accessible, and to talk of it like a practice. We talk about mindfulness practice or meditation practice, or the things that you do, the body work practices you might do, like yoga or Pilates or whatever. But equally, we need to do the work of the heart. And if we don't do the work of the heart, as a humanity, as one humanity, we will never overcome our differences if we don't understand the dynamics that are going on inside our own hearts. There's point scoring, something happens, so I have to make it even. And we even say we have to get even. That's an expression that we have. When somebody does something, you want to get even, which means you want to balance up. You want them to feel like you do. You want them to understand. Actually, the impulse of that is you want compassion, you want understanding, you want them to know the impact of what happened to you. You want them to understand it, and you want them to take responsibility for it, and you want them to be accountable, and you want them to make amends or apologize. And so then you're waiting, and sometimes until your deathbed, and it never comes. And so either that means you're the victim of all of the things that happen to you, or you can put your resentment down, in a particular way. And that's what I teach about. I teach a particular process so that people have a way of working through it, because a lot of the other teachings about forgiveness, or the stories about forgiveness, are amazing. But the bit where it's, and I forgave my mother, it's like, yeah, but how? What did you do? Like, I mean, suddenly you woke in, and so what I was trying to do was to discover what gets in the way, and how can we unpack it so that it's a bit like, understanding a recipe, rather than going like, here's the cake. It's like, great, cake, lovely. But if you want to recreate it, you need to know what the ingredients are and what order they're added in and how long you need to cook it.
It's really helpful to have somebody that can come alongside you and say, this is the recipe for forgiveness, because we aren't taught. And some of us stumble on it, but very few. You really have to be looking for it. And I think it starts with yourself. You have to learn how to forgive yourself, because if you can't forgive yourself and set your own boundaries and hold your boundaries to yourself, we we don't talk about these kinds of things, but they're so important. And holding resentment and hoping that you can forgive somebody because they will ask you for this forgiveness, which really if they recognize that they've wronged you, it's more likely that they want you to excuse that behavior and they don't want to change. But if they genuinely recognize that they hurt you and and do genuinely want to repair the situation and ask you for forgiveness, that's so rare. And
Yeah.
then on the other side of that, people don't know how to accept forgiveness. We're not taught how to do that either.
Yeah, it's an interesting point, actually, because I think there's three threads to forgiveness. So one is our need to forgive other people because of our own resentments and what we've gathered in our own hearts. Then there's our need to be forgiven for the things that we've done wrong or things that we're responsible for. And then there is self-forgiveness. And although I think lots of people think you do need to forgive yourself before you can forgive anyone, I don't like to put that restriction on. Start anywhere. If you feel like you can forgive somebody else first, go ahead. Whatever it takes. But I really agree that there's that the combination of, often even in the same relationship, there's the need for all of those three different elements, if you like, of forgiveness. And the way I teach it is as a process that you do yourself rather than with another person. And it may be that after you've done the process, you then go to the other person. And it's a bit like this, if these are all your resentments, it may be that there's one thing that you really need to have a conversation about. Like this is essential to the health of our marriage. Quite a lot of this stuff probably isn't. It's like me bitching about that, and why don't you do the mowing, and like don't leave the lid on the toothpaste on on the side of the sink, the little petty everyday things that are more really about you. I mean, when I was doing some forgiveness work on my mother, I resented her for wearing pop socks, and that was entirely my fashion sense and nothing to do with her. So I wouldn't expect somebody to sit down with me and let me tell them the full extent of my resentment, because you just get defensive. You're well, yeah, but I don't do that. What you're sort of defending yourself as opposed to just being able to listen. So that's why the process is done with a coach and not with the other person. And then maybe after the process, you go and have a little chat. You say, "Hun, can we have a little conversation about this? It's very important." And it may be that you have a really amazing heart opening conversation because you're not carrying all the resentment anymore. And I wish I had some more scientific evidence, although there are studies that have been done about forgiveness, but I would love to do a study. So if there's anybody in your community who's like a neuroscientist, or I would love to do more proven work that shows the transformation that forgiveness can create in somebody's life. But there are some studies that show that doing forgiveness work lowers your cortisol, it lowers your blood pressure, it improves your heart health, even the progression of some cancers. They've done some studies that show that it slows down the progression, which is amazing. But most of my proof, if you like, is anecdotal. But nevertheless, the numbers of times when somebody has done a forgiveness process and then they've contacted me a few days later and go, "You'll never guess what," and I say, "I probably might," and they go, "Well, I heard from such and such, and they've never normally do that, or they told me they love me, they've never told me before." So there's something shifts, and when you are stuck in a relationship and you move, suddenly the dance opens up. And there's a weird, if you have spiritual beliefs, you'll know there's some kind of energetic connection that is transformed when you rid your heart of all of the guff. If your heart's like this, open and available, then that makes it, the transmission of connection between you change. And that's true. I even had feedback the other day that somebody who did some forgiveness work that I was facilitating on a grief course, that she said it changed the trajectory of her life. And that's powerful, to be able to feel like you can come to terms with something inside of yourself that you felt that just was too late. There was nothing you could do about it. If somebody's died or somebody committed suicide, or like there's these different experiences that people may have had that feel like, well, there's nothing I can do. Being able to do this kind of work in a supported way can be transformational.
It transforms not only the individual, but everyone around you, which is what I think you're saying. And I think it also changes history. And this is going to sound weird, but as you forgive a situation or a person, you change the stories that you tell yourself and that you tell others. No two people experience any event the same way. And as you change the stories that go on in your head, because we all tell ourselves stories. We have brains, and that's what our brains like to do. They have to entertain themselves somehow. You don't have to react to every story that passes through your head, which was a weird eye opener for me. It's like, oh, I can have thoughts and not have an opinion about those thoughts. And it's the opinion about the thoughts you're having that cause you trouble. And it does physically affect you when emotions generate chemical reactions in your body that will either help your body or hurt your body. And that's, a lot of dis-ease in our bodies comes from hanging on to these emotions that we're having in reaction to thoughts we're having that may or may not be true. And in most cases, what is truth anyway? You may be harboring resentment against somebody. They may not even have any idea that you're resenting them for it. So
Yes.
it's like swallowing poison and hoping the other person's going to die because,
Hmm.
you know, and there is evidence around that. There's a
Yeah.
lot of evidence around that. Um, and just recognizing that not everybody has to take responsibility for how you feel or how you react to anything. Taking
That's
personal responsibility, being the hero of your own journey, um, instead of being the victim. And when you're holding those little pens in the jar and talking about all the grievances, sometimes, and this is something I do with my husband because, there are petty things that there's petty things I do that bug him too. And sometimes I'll just go to him and say, hey, I'm going to be the victim here for just a minute. And it's fair warning. I'm going to be the victim of this discussion, and I'm just going to put it out there. And you don't have to defend yourself. You don't have to even make amends for it. I just want to air this. And, or sometimes I'll just, attack him and he'll be like, are you trying to be the victim here? Or did you want to solve the problem? Which
yeah.
brings it back to, what is the end goal of the discussion we're having?
Yeah.
And you can do that with your thoughts.
Yeah, it's a really, really good point, and especially culturally, there's a lot of projection outside, like you are responsible for not, triggering me, as opposed to I'm triggerable because I have unhealed material that is being accessed, and how, amazing that that happens, that if I'm being triggered in this moment, it could easily be that there's some old unresolved material that's wanting my attention, and so that's, I should be thanking you, not trying to change you so that I am not disturbed. Because also the other thing, there's so much culturally, again, emphasis on safety, and about everything being sort of black and white, and we're missing nuance. We're missing, you can have your version of an event and I can have mine, and neither one of us is necessarily got all the facts. You might not know really why I'm upset because you said something that sounded exactly like my mother, but how are you supposed to know that? It's like,
Right.
so we have to take responsibility for our own emotional well-being, and being honest about our own shadows is key. We need to be honest about our dirt, and particularly if we're in the personal spiritual development field. I heard this great quote from Louise Hay the other day, which said, honey, if you want to clean your house, you have to see the dirt. And I feel that's a really good call to all of us. So rather than just being all sort of like la la and kind of affirming how marvelous everything is, that we look within and go, actually, I really am jealous of that friendship, or I am, resentful of that, or I resent the amount of time it takes me to look after my sick mother, for example. Like, owning, and that this was one of my part of my story with forgiveness, was admitting that I resented my mum for having MS. She was sick for 15 years, from the time I was 15 until when she died when I was 31. And that was like, what an awful daughter I am to resent how massive an impact that had on me. But it did. And my best choice was to hold resentment against it, because it was too painful to witness the loss of my mum that young, and the swap over of me pushing her around in her wheelchair and feeding her and changing her, that pain, the resentment somehow helped to protect my heart. And so understanding that we may be doing things for a very intelligent reason, a very intelligent coping mechanism, as Thomas Hubel might say, but at the same time being willing to admit, yes, I resented it. I resented the fact that my mum didn't go shopping with me when I was a girl, all of the things that I didn't have because she wasn't well. So it's really important, and especially, again, because we're getting to the ages where, for older women, where you're looking after elderly parents, if you didn't have an experience like I did. Now is the time where you're raising kids and you've got elderly parents, and then you're spread like really thin, and there may be resentment. and to be able to admit it and work through it can be really relieving. And like you said, I love the quote about the taking poison, but my other favorite is carrying resentment is like setting yourself on fire and hoping the other person is bothered by the smoke, because we're in the incendiary device, we're the fuel for the rage, the rage in the
Yeah.
unquenchable rage, you're the fuel. So
Yeah, I love that. It's so true though. It's so easy to fall into those patterns and so difficult in a lot of cases to recognize when it's happening. Like how how helpful would it have been for you if you knew somebody that knew about forgiveness that could talk to you while your mom was still alive and could have helped you in dealing with that, coping with that in a healthy way that wouldn't impact you for like the whole rest of your life, which, when you lose a parent that young, how can you help but not be impacted?
yeah, exactly. And that's why I love having a way of working through that. So I was lucky because about a year before my mum died, I did understand. I learned a lot about forgiveness at that point and was
Mhm.
able to do some forgiveness work. But even then, since she died, I've done other forgiveness work, as different things have happened and I became a parent and, kind of like at different phases in my life. And that's the other thing about forgiveness is it isn't like, oh well, if you haven't done it then that's it, that you missed your chance. That's why I
Yeah.
teach it as a practice. We don't say, oh, I've done yoga. It's like, yeah,
Or I
you've
took a
done yoga
shower.
yeah, exactly, for this week, and the same with taking your bins out. You take the garbage out, whenever you need to, and it's the same with our hearts. That needs work. We need to be, freeing our own hearts of the old material that just doesn't need to be in there anymore. And it takes a bit of work, not tons, but it takes a bit of attention, and but it's so worth it because my hope really is, and this is another really important thing that doesn't get talked about a lot about forgiveness, is the potential of it. And this was one of the other reasons why I ended up writing my book, because I was like, oh my god, this is so exciting, like the potential. Like imagine if everybody around the world did their forgiveness work. So you make your list and it may be long, and we used to say on the retreat, if it's not one thing, it's your mother. So you start there: mom, dad, siblings, no siblings, first heartbreak, kids at school who are mean, crabby boss, yourself. So that's like six at least. I got to number 36 before I thought of my mum, when it was my turn to write my list. So be generous, and work through your list. So maybe say it takes a month to work through your list and it's like maybe an hour a day. But at the end of that time, like, what state are you going to be? Sort of like this radiant being of unconditional love. And then if we all did it, and I understand, I'm not so naive to think that everybody would do it, but we could be living in a completely different world, completely different, in 1 month. I mean,
Yeah.
that is the potential of forgiveness. And then you then circle back to, okay, well, if that's the potential, why aren't we doing it? So
People don't know how.
yeah, I mean,
It's
that
really,
is definitely, and also because I think it's because forgiveness is seen in a particular way. I feel like I'm trying to rebrand forgiveness and try and make it accessible and sort of like interesting. And oh yeah, I want to do my forgiveness work. Yeah, I want to come to a class, or I want to do some one-to-one. Like I want to engage with it because it's one of the most powerful and effective ways of doing your inner work. Because you could be in therapy literally for decades and never do any forgiveness work. You could meditate for decades and never do any forgiveness work. Be as mindful as you like, never do any forgiveness work. Bendy as you like, never do any. So it's own thing, and that's what I'm trying to do, which is why I'm inviting myself on so many podcasts, because I really want to be able to talk about it. And the feedback that I tend to get as well is, wow, I hadn't really thought about it like that. So that means that there's a conversation for us to have.
yeah. I agree with you on so many levels. And I have thought a lot about forgiveness over the years. And I have done a lot of forgiveness work. I've felt wronged a lot in my life. And I've it's just so personally freeing when you forgive others. It's like,
Mhm.
does it really matter? And it doesn't. And I have people in my life today that are angry with me, and I want them to forgive me, but it's up to them. You can't make somebody forgive you. And
No,
so, you know, I can forgive them for not forgiving me.
exactly.
And, I can
Exactly.
have a relationship with them at whatever level they want. And I hope someday that it'll change, but it doesn't have to. My happiness does not depend on them.
Yes, exactly,
It's
exactly.
up to
Which is
them.
why it's so empowering is to if you take full responsibility. So you do everything you can. You know, the people who are not forgiving you, you make amends or you do whatever you can, you apologize or and if they still don't want to forgive you, then that's obviously up to them. And that's the other really important thing about forgiveness is you don't have to. You know, I'm a, massive fan and an enthusiast and a nerd, but it doesn't mean you have to do it. But if you end up on your deathbed you will let go in the moment of your last breath because you can't take your resentment with you. But most people, I think what happens, and even, I mean, this is an interesting thing that's happening sort of at the moment.
We've lost.
Yeah. So the most interesting thing is the conditionality of our resentment. So, for example, with King Charles, he's been diagnosed with cancer, and there's a slightly different, oh, well, maybe my resentment isn't quite as relevant because he's got cancer. So that kind of makes you then, well, why was it seemingly so important if now suddenly someone may be dying sooner than you thought that you think I could let that go? That in and of itself is very interesting because it sort of discredits the holding on of the resentment. And I was just saying about, on the moment of your death, like we resentment can be in our experience of dying because either we're realizing the resentments that we're still carrying, and most people seem to want to make amends before they die if they can, or the people who've been resenting them, like in that is this example, they're thinking, oh, well, maybe there's a reconciliation that can happen or some forgiveness that can happen. Because you don't have to reconcile, you can forgive without reconciling. But there's something about the impending death that can change things. But that to me is fascinating.
It is. I think we at some level know. It's one of those things we know, but we really, we never birth and death. Things that are always like pushed into institutions as though we're never going to experience them. And all dignity is at the door.
Mm-hmm,
You
mm-hmm.
just check your dignity out the door when you're dying and you're being born or you're participating in it.
Yeah.
But um, so let me back up just a little bit because I know that you are a coach and you are an author, and I want to know the name of your book and how you help people as far as coaching goes. How can
Yeah.
they
So this is my book, Forgiveness Made Easy. Well, technically, it should be forgiveness made a bit easier, but that wouldn't have looked right. So no. So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to undo the major obstacles to forgiveness, so that by the time you get to trying to do the process, it's easy. And that's my whole kind of thrust is to make it as easy as possible and as accessible as possible. And sometimes people need a long run up. Sometimes you're not ready. If you're really furiously angry, like for example, if like I would never say to somebody who's experienced a loss that immediately like they need to forgive. Sometimes people can do that, which is extraordinary, but sometimes there's a bit of time where or like a scab needs to form over the heart so that there's when it's really tender, and then there's a kind of timing to it, and sometimes it can be like 30 years later when you're just thinking, yeah, I really need to let that go. So people come to me when they know that they're ready to forgive or they're willing, that like, okay, I've carried this for as long as I can, or it's impinging. I worked with somebody recently whose current relationship was being impinged by her resentment of her previous partner, and so she came and we did 6 sessions, because actually the imprint of the relationship is often your early years. So mum or dad is your first male or female relationship, and that takes a bit of working through. So it's kind of worth doing the work anyway. And if you're on some kind of personal spiritual development path, really worth doing that little bit of work.
Yeah.
You know,
And so
yeah,
I know that you offer a couple chapters of your book for free, and they
I
can
do.
find that on your
Yeah.
website.
Yeah, on my website, which is forgivenessmadeeasy.co.uk, because it's a UK site. So forgivenessmadeeasy.co.uk. And then the other thing that I offer is their online forgiveness fields. And so that's a practice space, a bit like a yoga class where people come and do their practice together. So it's really cheap to come, much cheaper than working with me one to one because it's a group. But also, there's something wonderful about the group field, and I called them forgiveness fields for a couple of reasons. One was this lovely idea of that every time someone forgives, it adds to the field of forgiveness. So if you're sensitive to energies or kind of that sort of that kind of attunement, the quality of forgiveness has a particular, it is actually similar to unconditional love, because you have no conditions on whether or not you're going to hold that ill will. You're choosing to let it go. So it's actually, I would say, sacred space without being too kind of like, because there's something about being willing to do that, to say, even though this really difficult thing happened, I choose to not hold my ill will against that person for what they did or didn't do. And that's incredible. And then the other reason I call them forgiveness fields is because of that beautiful Rumi poem that you may know, where he says, out beyond ideas of right doing and wrong doing, there's a field. I'll meet you there. And I just love this idea, like beyond all of our bitching and moaning and this, that, and is this like this open field where we can sit and then we can pour our darkness into space, let that all go. And we work with microphones off, so it's actually, Zoom is great to do forgiveness work because everybody can work with their microphones off. So even though I'm guiding the group and they're speaking out loud and they're doing the steps of the process, they're in their own space, so they feel held and safe. They don't have to go anywhere. And but it's a powerful experience. People are often quite surprised by how powerful it can be. Just so that's a 90-minute class.
That that sounds like an amazing opportunity for people, especially if you're struggling with forgiveness of someone or something.
Yeah.
And most people know that they know at least one something that they're struggling with, because
Yeah. Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
there's always something new that moves in, something
Yeah.
old moves out.
Yeah. I mean,
Because
and I
forgiveness, there's
really,
lots more space.
yeah, and I'm very generous about my definition of needing to forgive somebody is quite low, because when I was first invited to write down my list, I thought, well, pretty much everyone, and I think if you have that kind of generous attitude towards your own resentment, then that keeps you entertained. And even literally today, I was just thinking, no, I feel a bit jealous about a dynamic between two friends, and I feel excluded. And I'm like, okay, I need to do some forgiveness work. So it's really good. I have it as a practice. Literally, on the day my brother died recently, I was doing forgiveness work with about some other family members who were going to be there. It's an incredible practice, a practical thing that you can do that helps to clear the field so that you can show up with your heart open, 100% fully available to the needs of the moment. It's powerful.
Yeah, it is very powerful. So we talked about how they can get a hold of you. And is there one thing that you'd really hope that they take away from this conversation?
Well, hopefully to be inspired to do their own practice. One thing that I do like to say really is that your forgiveness is an act of amnesty for the whole of humanity. And that's how we create peace on earth, one heart at a time, starting with yours. And it really matters, because I can't change the political situation, however I would love to be able to do that. I have one vote and one voice, but I can be 100% in charge of what's going on in my own heart, and hopefully inspire other people to do the same, because that's how we change things from the bottom up. We release our hearts and say, okay, I can't do anything about the war outside, but I can do anything that I want about the war inside. So I make my own heart a garden of peace. So that's my invitation.
I love that. I just put my endorsement on it because I
Thank you,
feel
Jo.
the same way. It's like what you do for yourself and the people that you touch, your family, your neighborhood, your community, it matters. It matters a lot.
Yeah.
And the more kindness you can show, and kindness is the most important towards others, because you can forgive the little grievances that come up and let them go. We could live in a world that was beautiful and peaceful and kind and made you feel good and made you feel important, because as you start to take responsibility for yourself, you allow others to take responsibility for themselves. Everybody can be responsible for themselves and show up being their best self. It's just like I like to imagine what the world will be like at that point. And I'm
Me
really personally excited about it because I see
Yeah.
it coming.
Yeah, me too, because it's like, well, what's possible on the other side of that? So, like, because I
Yeah.
don't necessarily believe that you have to be in therapy for thousands of years. It's like when we get past the past, now
Mhm.
what? How do we show up? What do we co-create together? What's possible for us as a humanity? How glorious could we create things to be? And that's what excites me. But it does involve us doing our housekeeping, doing our little spring
Mhm.
cleaning, and like you said, it ripples out to our immediate families and everything. But also, I just think it's like taking quite a radical and counterculture stand to say, despite all that's going on in the world, I am going to be a role model. I am going to be an exemplar of love.
Mhm.
That is my sacred duty.
Yeah. And it starts with your thoughts and forgiveness. I thank you so much, Barbara. This has been an amazing conversation. I've really enjoyed it.
Yeah, me too. Thanks, Jill. Really cool.
Thank you so much for tuning in to another empowering episode of the You World Order Showcase podcast. We hope you've enjoyed hearing from our incredible life, health, and transformational coaches who are making a profound impact on the world. Remember, change begins with you, and you have the power to transform your life and the lives of others. If you want to take that next step and unlock your true potential, visit thecoachesalchemist.com, where you can find the 3 ways we can help you for free to spin your talent into gold with clarity, a system, and a plan. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button so you never miss an inspiring episode. And if you enjoyed today's show, we'd greatly appreciate it if you could leave us a review on your favorite podcast platform. Your feedback means the world to us and helps us reach more people with our positive message. Stay connected with us on social media for updates, behind-the-scenes content, and upcoming guest announcements. You can find us on Facebook at the You World Order, or simply visit thecoachesalchemist.com.